Well, who had what? Well, what I'm going to do here is to try to tell you what was certainly what was in our house, or perhaps what wasn't in our house, but what I think what you would be likely to have found in most houses in the 1940s. You know, the fair average quality house. And I think it's reasonable to assume that most people had most things that allowed life to go on. Now, the quality of those things that they had would certainly have varied. The general, we'll say, ambience within which those things that were necessary for life existed would certainly have varied. But, you know, at heart, people had a stove and plates and cups and knives and forks and things like that. The things they needed to get by with, they had. But I'll come to that in a moment. What I wanted to do was a couple of things I mentioned yesterday about, that lad trying to remember life in the 40s. And he talked about the dances at the well, I suppose there's fancy dress ball and such balls as there were in the town, and in the world, all very flashy balls, debutante balls and things like that. Oh, after the war, I'm sure it didn't happen during the war. But one of the dances, I mentioned the Lambeth Walk and so on, and that was really just walking. You sort of walked along and swaggered along, and when you came to the end of the verse, you went, "Oi!" Then you probably repeated it, and then you might have gone in the other direction or something. I'm not sure. It was a very simple dance. There was a hokey pokey. People loved that. I don't know why, but they did. And let me see. And then there was one I left out. It was called Hands, Knees and Bumps a Daisy. You'd sort of walk along, and people tended to be in a bit of a line, but you had to sort of participate. Hands, knees, you hit your knees, and then you hit bums. Bumps a daisy. Very sexy dance. Very sexy dance for those days. Hands, knees, and bumps a daisy. I don't know what else you did. I think you probably walked a little bit further and you continued with hands, knees, and bumps a daisy. It was sort of like the 1940s. Well, I don't know that it was a sexy dance, but I remember being in Augathella once. I think it was Augathella. And they said that it was absolutely compulsory for the last dance to be slow. They said, for the mood. Ha ha ha! Look out the riverbank and book your place after that, I would have thought. But that was true. The last dance was always, snuggled together and very slow and gyrating, for the after-dance activity. Oh dear, terrible. Never happened in Charleville, but probably Augathella, I think. Okay then. I also mentioned that Keith Bowden won a prize at the State School Fete. Not the State School Fete, the State School Fancy Dress Ball. But now they come to think of it, I think it may have been his cousin. He had a cousin called Dixie Newton. I think it may have been Dixie Newton. He was the Squanderbug. Now, I had a look on the internet, and sure enough, here were the sorts of advertisements you saw about the Squanderbug. Well, I'll get them in here. In other words, if you squander money, then you're not really helping the war effort. You're helping the Germans, you're helping the Nazis, and there we are. It was the Squanderbug. I thought it was the Wastebug, but no, it was the Squanderbug. And Dixie went as a Squanderbug, and he was certainly a Squanderbug, but he has all sorts of bills pinned to the cardboard on the back of him. Oh, that must have been about 1945, 1946, I think. But anyway, Dixie, I'm pretty sure it was Dixie, not Kevin. Kevin, he was a good, nice fellow, Kevin Bowden. Okay then. And I also mentioned a couple of cartoon characters. That big bird, I don't know which cartoon it was, but great big rooster. And I didn't know his name, but his name was Foghorn Leghorn. Oh, big, loud creature, Foghorn Leghorn. And then Mammy in Tom and Jerry, the one, you never saw her face. But she was known as Mammy Two Shoes. I knew she was Mammy, but I didn't know she was Mammy Two Shoes. And Foghorn Leghorn Well, I don't even know that I knew his name. I just knew he was a great bombastic creature. It was probably the internet that told me he was Foghorn Leghorn. I don't know, but anyway, they were the things that I couldn't remember last night or left out, but I thought it was worth recording. Okay, now I'll tell you what we had in our kitchen. And the probability is that whatever we had in our kitchen, most people had in their kitchens too. Well, you had a stove, but most people had a wood stove. Now, we had a wood stove, a crown wood stove. Not a flashy sort of stove, but, you could burn wood in it, and you could burn cakes in it, and you could render fat on top of it. You could heat water for the bath in winter on it. Oh, there are many things you could do in it. You could cook, you could fry, all of those things. Now, the Jack Bilby's down the road, and Gladdy had a bigger and more, or, like a fire. It was still a stove, and it had essentially the same things as we had, but it was rather more flamboyant. Ours was just plain black, and I think Crown was etched in silver or something. Silver, steel, stainless steel. But Auntie Glad's, I remember, had green enamel on the oven door, and it was sort of like the 5-star one, whereas ours was what you might call the basic model. And so, you would burn the wood on one side, and then under that the ash would fall through, and you had the ash tray underneath, which had to be emptied from time to time. And eventually we got all great luxury. I think we might have been a little bit tired of heating bath water in the 4-gallon kerosene tin. This is for the winter baths, because we had the cold water end of the bore. You might think that's not possible, and surely it's not still so today, but for most of my life there in the early days, we had cold water in winter. Oh, it was a terrible damn business. Other people in town had, boiling hot water. Not us, I can tell you. And so we had the family bath, which derived from the 4-gallon kerosene tin of water, which took some heating, of course, and I think we probably transferred it into the bathroom by saucepan or something. I'm not quite sure. But, it was not 5-star, I can tell you. And that water must have been pretty soupy by the time we finished. Okay, then. Now, we didn't have a sink. I don't know whether other people had sinks or not. They probably did, I can't remember whether Auntie Glad had a sink. She may have had a sink, I don't know. I know grandfather, they didn't have a sink. Like I say, he had a washing up dish, which, as I say, was the cause of many, many fights in our household because we didn't always approve of how Janice did things. So, there was a sink. Then there would be a kitchen table, and there would have been some chairs, I think. I'm not sure whether there was 2 lots of chairs or 1 lot of chairs. Probably in our house, 1 lot of chairs. But it may be that in more sophisticated houses, there was the kitchen table, and then there was probably an area outside where you ate, and that was sort of like a dining table, you might call it, and that's where the chairs were. Or maybe the chairs migrated, I'm not sure. I think our chairs migrated because when we were doing the washing up and wiping up and putting away at night, we couldn't have done that if the chairs were in our road. But certainly in winter we had to eat in there too, so we must have adjusted the chairs somehow or another. So what was there? Well, okay, then you had what was called the dresser. Excuse me. Now, in the dresser we kept cups and plates, and there were drawers in which you kept knives and forks and spoons and any other implements you had. You would have had, say, a tin opener, because everybody needed a tin opener because so much came in tins. None of these just pull the top off. This was crank around, and you could cut yourself out. Jam tins, anything, jam tins. What else came in tins? Oh, tin peas, of course, and the luxury after the war of tinned cream. Oh, that was very lovely. Didn't taste much like cream, but I preferred it to cream anyway. It was really very, very nice. And what else would you have found in the kitchen? A labour-saving implement. What were they? Oh, one of those windy sort of whisks, or beating whisk. That was labour-saving. And the other labour-saving implement would have been the mincer. Many families had a mincer. You'd clamp the mincer onto the table, and then you drop the meat in at the top and you'd mince away, and you'd end with mince. And that was labour-saving. I can't think of any other labour-saving device we actually had in the kitchen. No, no. Of course, you also would have had, a baking dish, of course, and you had, there were all the canisters, flour, tea, sugar, rice, and God only knows what else. And I think we kept them fairly well. We had a special tea canister, and we had a special, I think, a flour canister, and so on. And they were on a shelf up above the stove, and it was lined with what was known as shelving bays, a sort of a backed plastic of some kind. I don't think it was plastic, but shelving bays it was called, and could easily be wiped down if you wanted. Now, our cups usually didn't have handles, and my father didn't feel under any compulsion. I think it gave a certain sort of oriental flavour to our drinking, like a sake bowl, only big bowl, and so on. Plates were normally in one piece. Some of them came to grief, I think. We didn't go in very much for enamelled cups or anything like that, but I think that some families may have done that. The more primitive families probably had enamel cups, but not us. We had either, handleless, not bone china, of course, but, crockery. And what else would you have found in the kitchen? Well, of course, we had the normal range of knives and forks now, and spoons and all that sort of thing. Now, we had to have the normal range of spoons, and because our mother was very strict about rules for eating, and you had to know how to lay the table. So you put the tablecloth on the table, and then you had to know there was a special, cutting knife, with your fork, and it was matched with a knife. Now they went on the outside, and then inside that, well, we only had a spoon inside that, a dessert spoon. I suppose roundish, kind of like a soup spoon. We probably used them both, I would have thought. And if, some families were really putting on the dog, and they had a special fork that matched the spoon, that was for your dessert. But there was also, you see, you had a plate of a certain size for your main meal, but beside your plate you had a bread and butter plate, and you had to have a special knife for that one. That was a different shape from the knife you used to cut up the meat with. But my mother insisted that we knew how to lay those knives and forks and spoons and so on in the proper order, in the proper way, and then you had to put out the bread and butter plate. We were lucky. That must have indicated a certain degree of calm in our house. I mean, to have the bread and butter plates, unbroken and unthrown, that was something of an achievement, I would have thought. Or maybe the bread and butter plate wasn't big enough to be worth throwing. But you'd put out the bread and butter plate, and you'd have the knife on that, and it had to point in a certain way. And then the forks had to be up, and the knives' blades had to be in, and so on. And that was very, very important. And then, of course, you had to be taught when you sat down for dinner that, when you finish, you had to hold your knife in a certain way, your fork in a certain way, and so on, your spoon in a certain way. And we certainly had to learn all of those things. And then when you were finished your meal, you had to know to put the knife and the fork together, and the fork down, and I think it was down, I can't remember. It might have been down, I can't, I'm getting a bit rough, And then your knife had to be with it and parallel to it. And that meant you were finished. If you were one of these vulgar people who finished your meal and you left a fork going this way and a knife going this way, well, what would you do when you went to a fancy restaurant? The waiters would, the food was gone, but that indicated you weren't finished. But if on the other hand you made a mistake and put your knife and fork together when you still hadn't finished, the waiter would whip the plate away. So we had to know those rules and so on. Well, we mastered all of that. But then there was the ritual of the eating. everybody had to be seated before eating could begin. Everybody, and nothing could, no. Everybody had to be present, everybody had to sit, hands had to be washed. The final person to sit was my father, who sat at the end of the table. My mother used to sit at the other end of the table, but she found it advantageous to sit on the side of the table among the masses, so to speak, because if you sit at the side of the table, you can get a good whack at anyone. You can whack the ones on this side, you can whack the ones on that side, and the kids on the other side of the table, you can kick them under the table, and that promoted discipline at mealtime. Okay then. So you would sit. The meals would be put on the table. They'd be brought from the kitchen and put on the table. Everyone would have their meal in front of them. Then finally, my father would sit, and you would wait until my father picked up his knife and fork to begin to eat. And when he picked up his knife and fork, and not before that, could we pick up a knife and fork, and then we too could begin to eat. But nobody could eat until he began to eat, and everyone had to be there. And then if you wished to leave the table for any reason during the meal, you had to say to Dad, would you excuse me for a moment, please? I don't know what for, but anyway, you'd have to ask. You couldn't just get up and wander off, and you'd have to ask permission to leave the table, and then you would come back. And then when the meal was over, there was no business of just drifting off. When the meal was over, I think Dad would announce the meal was over, and when Dad finished, he would stand up, then we could stand up, and then we could leave. Oh, look, I tell you what, with the training in our house, with all its wild ways, things thrown, abuse, oh, you name it, the lot. We could have dined at Buckingham Palace, I think, and not disgraced ourselves. And we're forever grateful for our mother for that, because it did mean that no matter how rough we may have been, it didn't matter, how difficult our background had been, we could go and we could eat anywhere and not disgrace ourselves. And in fact, when we were eating out, and if we were using the manners that our mother had taught us, we were probably regarded as members of the quality. We certainly didn't disgrace ourselves, that's for sure. I don't know that other kids... Look, I go to places these days, and I go to... There's a place over the road here called, what do they call it? Coffee Club or something. And people drink coffee and they eat there. And I look around, I sit there with my sister. And I say, Jill, have a look at that over there. And the people there these days who do not know how to use... They don't know how to use a fork. They don't know how to use a knife. They do the strangest things, like kids at school. They don't know how to hold pencils. Totty Conley would not have taught us that, and Totty Conley wouldn't have tolerated not being able to hold a pencil properly. Oh, you would have been in big trouble. But anyway, that was that. So that was about all that was in the kitchen. There were no labour-saving devices, none of these electrical things that we have today. Like blenders and fry pans and... Is it fry pans, I suppose? Oh, the range of things in the kitchen. You could spend a fortune. You could be a squanderbug today with all of the labour-saving devices that are available in the kitchen. Now, our kitchen was fairly primitive in terms of what it actually cooked. My mother was not a great cook, and the sponge cake always eluded her. But nevertheless, down at our Auntie Glad's place, she was mistress of the sponge cake. But she had many superstitions about the sponge cake. She would make the sponge cake, and either we were banished totally from being upstairs while the cake was cooking, or, if absolute necessity required that we pass through the kitchen, we had to tiptoe through the kitchen so as to cause no vibration, because she believed that if there was any vibration in the kitchen, it upset the gods of the cake or something like that, and the cake would flop. Well, I don't know. I think that's all bullshit. But she did make wonderful cakes, wonderful, wonderful cakes. And she would put a lovely lemon icing in the middle of it. Very, very nice. Not that we shared it very much. And I can't say that we frequently partook of those wonderful sponge cakes. But I do remember having a slice or two of them in my lifetime. And they were so good that I remember them. But she was a good cook, that one. Auntie Glad, wonderful woman. And a wonderful sense of humour, you know. The things she tolerated and could still laugh about them, you know, even when she had a corrupt half loaf of bread. Later on, she could still laugh. Oh, she was a wonderful woman. And I could find nothing unkind ever to say about Auntie Glad. She was just wonderful. And she lived for a long, long time. I don't know how old she was when she died. But she deserved to live for a long time because she was a good woman. She was a good cook. But their house, you see, if you went into their kitchen, it would be like one of these, you know, it would have had lino on the floor probably, and it looked nice. You know, it looked like one of these, you know, home beautiful kitchens. Oh, it was very lovely. You know, walls painted and all that sort of thing. Whereas our kitchen probably had nothing on the floor and probably the walls weren't painted, and it was, you know, it didn't have the same ambience, shall we say. But you could have gone to any house in town. I mean, the Gordon's house wouldn't have been painted inside. Grandfather's. I think grandfather's place may have been painted inside, if I remember rightly. But then again, I may not, you know. But whether it was or not, the house burned down a few months ago, and that was the end of Bilby Hall, you know, the ancestral hall of the Bilbys. Oh, terrible. But from the ashes, the ghosts will rise, I'm sure. Okay. But that was it. So in the kitchen, all kitchens were pretty much the same. I mean, there was no great distinction between who had more labour-saving devices than anyone else, because everyone had, you know, the basic things. It's just that the quality of some was a little better than others. And, you know, our bread knife would have had no handle. The cups would have had no handles. There may have been a crack or two in the plates and so on. Whereas if you went to a more genteel homes, well, the cups would have had handles. And the plates may even have matched. You never know. I mean, we didn't go in for such things as that sort of thing. That didn't trouble us. But, you know, kitchens were much of a muchness. It's just that the ambience in some was rather superior and rather more genteel than the ambience in others. Ours would have been, you know, sort of well equipped, I suppose, and 1 star. I mean, we would have liked cups with handles. You know, it would have given us some feeling of gentility. And it would have been better, you know, if when the chairs broke, my father had actually replaced them. Well, he did eventually, but that might take some years, you know. And so sometimes we had to sort of make do with what we sat our bum on. But there was a time, though, when we had chairs for everyone. If you didn't have chairs for everyone, well, we would have had boxes for everyone. But, I mean, a box and a chair just as a place for the bum at the level of the table, you see. And so whether you had boxes or chairs, it made no great difference. Essentially, the equipment for a table. So there was no great difference between one house and another, other than in the presentation. So that was that. Okay. Now, the bathrooms, I really can't tell you about other people's bathrooms. I just know that ours was very primitive. It had some cupboards in it that were always overfilled, and I don't know what you actually put in them, because in our house, once you had a cupboard and you put things in it, they were then promptly forgotten, and the cupboard was really of not much use after that because it was full. But full of God only knows what. Things then went on top and whatever else. There was a bathtub in the bathroom. It had a tap, that was for the hot water in summer and the cold water in winter. And that was really about it. Nothing more than that, I can't. No, that was it. That was it. You know, there were no heaters on the wall, or what else might people have in bathrooms? Oh, you know, they might have big fluffy towels and all that sort of thing. Well, we didn't quite have a lot of big fluffy towels. We had fairly pedestrian sort of towels, but at least they made of cotton and not any sort of synthetic or anything like that. Our bathroom was, well, you had to know where your body parts were, I suppose, because, especially at night, because very often the light there didn't work, and Dad didn't get round to putting a new bulb in there very often. So you could leave the door open, you could get some light in from outside, but other than that, they had been pretty well in the dark, just as well we knew where our body parts were, and so we could actually wash them. And but the linen for the bathroom was nothing. But I'm sure that we went down to Don's place. Well, they had quite a nice bathroom, as I recall, but essentially didn't have much more than our bathroom had. Would still had one tap. Oh, I know, Don did something once. Yes, I'm fairly sure. He overflowed the bath, and the bath overflowed and flowed in onto the floor of the... Well, what was he to do? Well, Uncle Jack had what do you call those things, a brace and bit or something, and he bored a hole or bored holes in the floor, and the water escaped that way. I'm sure Don did that. Now, I don't know. I don't think I lie, but I'm pretty sure we didn't ever have to do that because we didn't let the water run over, but I'm pretty sure it was Don who did that. Don't think it was Stuart. But Don was very imaginative, with that sort of thing. And but the rest of Auntie Glad and Uncle Jack's house was really very, very nice. The floors were all nicely covered, the beds were nicely made, lovely quilts on the beds and so on, mosquito nets and that type of thing. But again, you see, it was a house with one child. Well, ours was like a kindergarten. An overcrowded kindergarten. By the time our crowd rummaged through, things got pretty knocked around, I tell you. Yes, people always say, when you get married, don't buy very good furniture because it's going to be knocked around. Wait until the kids grow up, then get the good furniture. And I think Dad was of that philosophy. Wait till the kids grow up and then get the good furniture. Well, I don't know that we ever arrived at the grown-up point, but no, there was the bathroom. Okay, well now where do we go to after that? We need to go to, after that, to the washing. Now, in the early days, you did your washing in tubs downstairs. Oh, no. Back in the 40s, you had a washing up tub, and you went downstairs, you had a tub out the back, and you did the washing in this washing up tub, tin thing. You get them at the plumbers, I think. And then, but you also had the boiler. And everyone had a boiler, and so clothes would have to be boiled. And, our clothes were boiled. Of course, we had a lot of clothes to boil. And often they boiled over. And when they boiled over, they tended, if you weren't very careful, to singe a little bit. Now, there may have been more flash boilers than we had. Our boiler was... where did I find a thing here I'm looking for? I might have to look it up in a moment. Wait a minute, just let I pause because I need this. I won't be a minute. Okay, then here I'm back again. I had to have a bit of a search. So you went downstairs and you used the big wash tub. Not a sink, a tub, washing tub. And you do whatever you did, and you probably used a bar of kerosene soap maybe. I can't think of any other. Yes, because people used to make their own soap sometimes, I think. And so, you'd wash there. But you also boiled the sheets, and you probably boiled all sorts of other cottony things. Our copper, as it was called, used to boil over from time to time. And so, because you had to have a copper stick, you see, which you could lift things up with and drop them back in. Or when they're boiling over, poke them back in. But if you were a little inattentive, things got sometimes a little burnt or singed. But anyway, no matter. We're between friends. We won't worry about that. But there used to be a saying among ladies who took an interest in these things about the industry and therefore the reputation of ladies when they did their washing. And there was a rhyme relating to washing. And it said, "They that wash on Monday have all the week to dry. They that wash on Tuesday are not so much awry. Those that wash on Wednesday are not so much to blame. They that wash on Thursday wash for shame. Those that wash on Friday wash in need. and they that wash on Saturday, oh, they are sluts indeed. So you had to be careful of the day upon which you got your washing done. Well, I don't know. I think washing went on at our place pretty often because, we didn't have a lot of clothes, and I don't know when Mum did the washing, and I don't know what day of the week it was, but I'm sure that it wasn't on Saturday, because if it was on Saturday, no, she had to go uptown and do the shopping on Saturday. So Mum probably did the washing at some stage during the week, I think, but on what day I couldn't actually be certain. It would probably depend upon some extent about whether there was wood or not to get the copper boiling. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. And so that was it. Now, that was in the mid-40s, but later on, I don't know when it was. Oh, I can't remember what year it would have been. It must have been getting on, about 49, 50, something like that. We got a washing machine. Oh dear. Well, needless to say, me and my big mouth, we got a washing machine. It was, as if we were going to go a lotto or something. And I remember going to school and just casually mentioning that we had got a washing machine. Well, we thought it was very good. I think it was a Simpson washing machine, big, sturdy thing, wheels, and it had one of those ringers, not no spin dry things, a ringer. You had to be very careful that you didn't get your hands caught in it. But if your hands did get caught in it, there was sort of a release. Of course, you may have had squashed fingers and arms. You may have cried out in pain before you could release the thing. But Mum and Dad were very impressed by that, because Roy Foster, I think it was, he told them it was the best washing machine ever made. And up until that time it probably was, but it was a very sturdy thing. But washing machines started to make their appearance. Well, I don't know. I can't really tell what year it was. Might have been 50, maybe a little earlier, maybe a bit later. But the arrival of washing machine was a wonderful thing. So that was the washing. Of course, you then had to hang the washing up. No dryers or anything like that. Hanging the washing out at our place was a bit difficult, because my father had erected the clothesline, and he erected the clothesline in the same way as he erected fences, where he'd go down the bush and he'd get a post, or, a gidgee or something like that, I don't know. But, they're all crooked, and they never really made very satisfactory fences. They certainly didn't lend themselves towards an efficient sort of gate. So gates at our place never actually closed, and the idea of a latch, well, that was an impossibility. And so with the clothesline, you'd have two posts at one end, and then you'd have an arm on both ends with wire strung between the two. In our house, not taut. A certain limp sort of wire going from one end to the other. And the wire, and so you could let the clothesline down, so you could hang the clothes up. But then Dad had another fork, a piece of mulga or gidgee or something, with a fork in the end of it, and you'd put the fork under the wire, and you'd prep the fork up. And so your clothes would flutter in the breeze until the fork fell down, and then your clothes would end in the dirt. But that was just a hazard that you had to put up with. And eventually we got some grass growing there, And when we got some grass growing there, when the clothes fell down into the dirt, it didn't really make, so much of a difference. But I don't know. I mean, even when you had, those wringer things on your washing machine, your clothes were, not exactly spun dry, dry as in spun dry. They were still fairly wet, I think, but, the water was crushed out of them. But then they had to run the risk of the clothesline. Now, there must have been in town, even at that point, some rotary clotheslines. Not that I saw any. I don't know when we got rotary clotheslines, but they were very advanced things. But there was a rotary clothesline in the grounds attached to the domestic science room at the school. They didn't hang their clothes out on a string of wire. They had a rotary clothesline, and that was present there even in the 40s. So I don't know when rotary clotheslines made their appearance, but certainly it did make an appearance at our place for quite some years. We preferred the old swinging arm, loose piece of wire propped up by the gidgee post with a fork in it, and we just had to hope for the best. That was washing. God, I wouldn't have cared to be a washerwoman in those days. Okay, well now let me move on. The bedrooms. Bedrooms are fairly primitive. There was a bed. Oh, and then you would have what was called a dresser. And the dresser usually had drawers, and you kept things in there. You kept what clothes you had, and as I say, there weren't a great number of those clothes that we had, although some people probably had, almost hope chests of clothes, I'm not sure. But not at our place. We had what you might call the basics. In winter, I didn't worry much about summer because, you could get by with a loincloth, I think, in summer. But in winter, we were always cold, because in winter we had, if we're lucky, we had a fleecy lined singlet. Oh, that was good, but we only had one. I don't know when that was washed, And then we had one jumper. That was all. And it wasn't a very expensive one because mine always used to wear out the sleeves here. So I'd pull the sleeves up so no one would quite notice that there was a dirty big hole in them. But jumpers only lasted. And they were sort of, I suppose they said they were wool, but they were not very warm, I can tell you. They must have been wool with a bit of synthetic in them or whatever, I don't know. But in those days, boys didn't wear, beanies to school or hats to school in winter to keep your head warm. And you certainly didn't wear gloves, and so your hands were frozen in winter. And teachers, you couldn't write until about 10 o'clock because your hands would be thick and frozen. You always wore short trousers, and but if you could get away with it, long socks were a pretty good thing in winter to have. But winter was always, you took it for granted you were going to be cold. And as I say, my father didn't always buy everything that a 1940s family would have bought. He would have had those things that a 1920s family would have bought. And so we were always cold in winter because my father was not particularly inclined to spend up big on blankets and eiderdowns. I remember we had an eiderdown. It was called an eiderdown. I don't think there was much eider or down in it, that's for sure. But oh dear, winter I hated because we were just always cold. There just weren't enough blankets, that's all. So you'd load as much as you could on your bed, anything that might keep you warm. But we used to have flannelette pyjamas in winter with those cords that used to come out. That caused me the difficulty on the night that the Dalton burned down because the cord had come out, the trousers would fall down, and I had to watch the Dalton fire holding up my pants up. Oh, but I didn't care because the fire was... even if my pants had fallen down, no one would have noticed because they wouldn't have been looking at me. They would have been looking at the fire. I could have walked naked through the place and no one would have noticed. But I held the trousers up, out of family honour, I suppose. That might have been the truth of the matter. But yeah, there wasn't much. There was a thing, we had a thing called a wardrobe. And you could hang things in it, but we didn't have too much to hang in it. What would you hang in it? Well, we certainly didn't have raincoats or anything like that. Maybe if we had a coat of some kind, I don't know. I really do not know what we would have hung in the wardrobe. Maybe we just kept things in it, kept childhood treasures in with the wardrobe. I'm not sure. Certainly I think a wardrobe in our bedrooms might have been a little, shall we say, excessive, unnecessary, but it might have just been regarded as, a nice object. Okay, well, whatever. Well, that's it. You've got the kitchen, you've got having meals, you've got the bathroom, you've got the boiler, you've got the wash tub, you've got the clothesline. Well, pretty well everybody would have had their own equivalent of those very things, some classier than others. Ours may well have been 1 star. Maybe it didn't even get 1 star sometimes, but it was really any difference between the star because the essential thing was still there, virtually everyone. But there was no luxury, I can tell you. All this business of conspicuous consumption, that came some years later. Okay, but I've left out the loo. Now, I know that Charleville was having the sewage pipes put in 1943, and I know that because my grandfather was on the dole, and he used to work on putting the sewage trenches in near the old hospital. And because he used to give me a ride, and if I went home that way, he would give me a ride in a bucket, and you'd have windlass would let the bucket down, and I'd get in the bucket, and they would wind me down, and I could get down into the trench. This was not in grade one. No, grade one? No, the prep classes. Toddy's first year, 1943. And they'd wind me down into the sewage trench, and then they'd wind me up again. I thought this was the greatest thing in the world, and I went to school and boasted how my grandfather was working on the sewerage. Well, I dare say a lot of kids were impressed by it. You know, in prep classes, they probably were impressed by it, because not everybody got a ride in a sewage trench bucket, but I did, because I had connections, you know. But our toilet, shall we call it? I don't know what we called it. I mean, we were a polite family. We wouldn't have called it, you know, in those vulgar names that people call it. But what did we call it? We're down in the... Well, we didn't say anything vulgar, that's for sure. My mother would have frowned upon that. Well, whatever it was. Look, to tell the truth, I can't think what we called it. But anyway, even though they were digging the trenches up there near the hospital, I don't know how long it was before the trenches came down to our area. Might have been, 45, 46, something like that. I don't really know. But up the back, you had a sort of wooden pedestal with a lid, and then there was sort of an opening underneath, and you put a pan. It was called a pan, it was about, I don't know, not quite a metre high. Ours was pretty full by the end of the week, I can tell you. But once a week, Jack Jeffries would come. He was known as the Gidgee Nightman. And the Gidgee Nightman would come, and he had a sort of leather thing over one shoulder, and he would pick up the can and hoist it up on his shoulder, and out he would go. And he would leave you behind a replacement pan with a little bit of sawdust in it, because you had a sawdust box beside what you might call, I suppose, the pedestal. I'm not quite sure. It was a wooden thing with a hole in it and a lid. And they were stinking bloody places. But, you became accustomed to them. The smell was just one of the smells of nature. And so, there we are. But eventually, of course, the sewage system did come. And so, I don't know, Dad probably got some relatives in, and they carted the toilet box, down to near the house, just near the back steps and down, not in the house, back steps. And so they sort of transferred it, and that's where the new flush toilet was put. But that was perhaps about the middle of the 1940s, I think. And Charleville was well advanced to that, because later on, I went to Boona in 1960. And when I went to Boona in 1960, they still had, 1960, mind you, they still had those pans. Ooh, horrible. Otherwise, Boona was very sophisticated, very religious and so on. But those pans, those still there. When I was in Augathello, I went to Augathello in 1958. And now, I don't know whether every house or whether there was a septic system there. I don't really know. But we certainly didn't have the pans there, that's for sure. But I stayed with the butlers in Augathello, and they were a family of quality. And so there would be no... I wonder what we called those places. I'm going to go to the, nothing vulgar. And we certainly wouldn't have called it the loo. Look, to tell the truth, it has eluded me. Unless we did say something vulgar, I don't know. But no, look, it really has escaped me. You'll have to get someone else to say what those places were called. But the vulgar people would have used awful words, terrible words. But not in our house. We were rather, from that point of view, squeamish. What I do recall, when we went to the school, I went to school in 1943. But by the 1943, the toilets at the school were all flush toilets. And they were unsavoury damn things. There was there was a little boys' toilet and a big boys' toilet, and then there was a mystery area over there, which was the girls' toilet. And I wonder if they have doors on their cubicles. I don't really know. The boys had no doors on their cubicles, but you had the little boys' toilet and had about 4 cubicles, no doors, with a little bit of wood on top, you know. There'd be no use having a sort of plastic top because a lot of kids used to what they call kangaroo it. They'd perch. They must have been many legs broken there as kids slipped into the pedestal. But nevertheless, you know, most kids could deal with this fairly deftly, I would have thought. And the big boys' toilet was sort of next door, and it had, 4 or 5 pedestals there, I suppose, and fairly ample accommodation for urination. And but there was no luxury about it. But there was an interesting thing about it. I remember going into the toilet there one day, and there was a kid there sitting on the toilet eating his lunch. And, I thought, well, this is not very nice. But we did have some lessons about that time in which we were encouraged not to eat our lunch in the toilet. Eat your lunch outside and then go to the toilet. When you go to the toilet, wash your hands. And so, we did that. I mean, the idea of us going to the toilet and having lunch there, horrible. But some people did. And so, but they did have those flush toilets in when I don't know what year it went there, but certainly they had them when I went to school in 1943. But they were not lovely. And, you had to be, what shall we say, inured to the gaze of the masses, because there was no privacy, and if anyone wanted to do a poop, well, they had to do a poop in public. And not everyone liked that very much. I know I probably suffered from hemorrhoids, I'm sure. Although, I tell you what, my first promotion in schools, that old bastard Wombold. Will I have a swig? Yeah. It was on account of the WCs at school that I had my first promotion. That bastard Wombold. He was a dreadful man. But he called me to the office one day, and he said, I have a very important job for you to do. I thought, oh, for God's sake, I haven't been teaching very long at all. This was 1957. God, I've hardly been teaching any time at all. And already I'm being promoted. Well, I didn't expect to become Director General or anything, but, I stood there waiting to hear what the great promotion was. Was I going to be in charge of something? Well, indeed, I was going to be in charge of something. But he said, I need someone reliable, someone with an attention to detail, and someone that, I can be assured could carry out the task diligently, competently, and reliably. Oh, look, I thought, I'll get this man to write me a reference. Well, I said, Mr. Womble, what is it you would like me to do? He said, I want you to go to the toilets each day at the end of school and make sure that they are all flushed. That was my first promotion. Well, I went on to greater things, I might add. But that was my first promotion, but I accepted the job with humility and with gratitude, in a sense, for my talent being recognised. Although the old bastard, there are plenty of others he could have given the job to, and they were just as reliable and industrious and all the rest of it as I was. From that regard, that's for sure. Oh, I don't think he liked me, old turd. Okay then. Well, now there we are. There's not much left there as far as being in the house is concerned. Oh, yard maintenance. Well, we didn't actually do any yard maintenance. We had that bloody awful, what was it called, buffalo grass on the lawn in front. The first lawns in Charleville, and I said the other day they were couch grass lawns. They weren't couch grass at all. The grass that was used there for lawns early in the piece was buffalo grass. Bloody awful stuff. You'd sit on the grass and it had hairs on it, and you'd be all itchy. And if you wanted to avoid the itch, you had to put a cloth down and sit on that. Oh, bloody awful thing. But eventually, people got the kikuyu. And the kikuyu, well, it invaded everyone's gardens, of course. But kikuyu it grew well, so long as it had plenty of water. It grew well and it was comfortable to sit on, but not that damn buffalo grass. But we had no yard maintenance equipment. Maybe if there was a sheep there, we might have done something. But as a general rule, I don't know. I think Dad used to wait until there was a sort of forest there, and he might have got a reaping hook or something. I don't know. But in those days, if you were devoted to yard maintenance, well, then what did you do? You would have had one of these push mowers. But our yard didn't lend itself to push mower, and you'd had to be pretty genteel to have a push mower anyway. I don't know how the other people kept their yard going, but anyway, we didn't have a push mower, and Eddie didn't. Well, we lived with it. In fact, I don't know of anyone down there. No doubt Uncle Jack had a push mower. Perhaps, I'm not quite sure. But if he did have a push mower in all of Lower King Street, he would have been the only one. Okay then. And the only other bit of yard maintenance I can think of, and I think I mentioned that somewhere, every year in May you had to cut every branch off every white cedar in town. Well, we had enough damn white cedars, but the tailors over the back, they only had Deirdre and Yvonne. And there was no way in the world Deirdre and Yvonne would get up into those trees. And every year Stuart and I had to go and cut Mrs. Taylor's cedar trees. Oh, God. You'd think they were selling cedar trees. They had so many of the damn things. And we'd have to climb up into the trees. We'd have to climb over the fence, first of all, to get to their trees. And then we'd have these bloody blunt saws that Dad used to have. We'd have to cut every single branch right back to the trunk of these cedar trees, and then we'd have to cut all of the branches across and throw them over into Frank Conley's yard. Oh, it went on and on and on. My mother would say, "You boys haven't finished cutting Mrs. Taylor." And I think, no, and if only I could stop cutting Mrs. Taylor's cedar trees. Oh, I hated it. Stuart hated it too. We both hated it. I borne a grudge, that's for sure. I saw a photo the other day of Yvonne and Deirdre, you know. Didn't know I had it. But there they were, in their blue convent uniforms and so on. They were sturdy girls and they could have got up into the trees, but they didn't. Those Bilby boys over the back. And we got no money for it either. There was no sense of being paid. That just wasn't on in those days. And what would you have been paid? Sixpence? Sixpence a tree? God, you might have had, I don't know what. No, sixpence. You wouldn't have got sixpence a tree. You might have got threepence a tree or something. But we didn't even get threepence. But there was one good thing about it, because you threw these branches over the fence, you made a great big heap. Good for making cubby houses early in the piece. But by the 5th of November, for Guy Fawkes night, by then the cedars had dried and you could have a great bonfire with a Guy Fawkes on top, and we might have been permitted to buy about 5 shillings worth of fireworks. 5 shillings worth of fireworks. We'd have spinners and rockets. We thought it was the most wonderful thing. And so at that point we were glad we had the cedar limbs. But in May, when we had, because you had the May holidays about that time, oh, God, I hated that. I wonder what happened to those Taylor girls. Yvonne and Deirdre. Lovely girls, I suppose. You're nice girls. They're the ones who used to get hit over the arse with a hairbrush by their big sister Nita. And but they couldn't bloody well cut the cedar trees. So the bit of mowing, no, we did no mowing in our house. I really don't know what we did. But by the time we actually got even that old buffalo grass, that minimised the work to some extent. And then when we got the kikuyu, well, it also minimised it. But if you had just ordinary grass there, and we had plenty, I can tell you, before we got the buffalo grass, well, we just let it rip. I don't know how Dad replaced it, but he did somehow or another. But I think most people, well, they might have had a mower of some kind, or they might have had a goat, or they might have had a sheep, I don't know. But yard maintenance, that was about it. Of course, oh yes, over in another yard you had the wood heap. Well, of course, the wood heap, you get a load of wood, boxwood if you could. That was about the only decent thing. Now we had no sharp axes and no sharp tomahawk, and oh god, it was a terrible business. But anyway, it was always a bit distant from the house, and the air raid shelter was dug over near the wood heap. Of course, that was in the water, protect us from those Japanese planes that might come over, long distance plane there and back to bomb us. And so we'd have to go over and cut the wood there and get the chips and all that sort of thing. And that wasn't exactly yard maintenance, but everyone had to have, even the school had to have a wood heap, Who cut the wood, I don't know, because old Bawley wouldn't have done it. And you had to have the wood. Well, old Bawley might have cut it for his own stove, but what about up in the home science, or what do they call it, domestic science building? Who cut the wood for them? I don't know. Old Bawley wouldn't have done it, that's for sure. He might, old Bawley, he probably made Agnes, his wife, do it, I would have thought, after dark, because you never saw anyone cutting wood, but some wood had been cut there, Okay then. Well, there we are. Look, I'll just leave it at that because I've got more to say, of course, but I'm just trying to deal with what was in house yards. And as I say, there was one other thing we had, I don't know whether other homes had. We had a boot last. Now, you may think, did my father go in for boot making or something, or boot repairing? No way. He probably found the boot last, at the rubbish dump, because my father was a lover of rubbish dumps. Oh, he was in his element at a rubbish dump. I dare say, if my father's in heaven now, for him heaven would be a rubbish dump. He always found something of those, something that would come in handy. And I'll bet he got that damn boot last. And the boot last, you know what a boot last is like. It weighs about 4 or 5 kilograms. But it was never used for boots or anything like that. But Dad used to keep the tongues of sheep, and those stolen sheep and so on. He'd keep the tongues of sheep. And then he would make a sort of a brawn, I suppose you might call it. You would cook the tongue. I think you had to skin the tongue, I think. And then you'd put the tongue in a pot, and other bits and pieces of meat and so on, that you had there. And then there must have been some sort of jelly. You must have put a gelatina, but it had to be compressed. And so Dad would get this. He had this pot, and then he'd get a sort of a lid on it. I don't know what the lid was. It was probably a plate or a saucer or something. And then on top of it would go the boot last. And the boot last would put enough pressure on the stuff inside to cause this compression of the meat and the tongue and all the rest of it, and you'd have this prawn. It was really quite good, And so I suppose in that sense that was a labour-saving device, because otherwise you would have had some sort of other pressure. So Dad had the boot lasts, and, it was a 1940s labour-saving device in a way, I suppose. But that was about it. Oh, dear, oh, dear. If anyone came to the house and they saw that boot last, they would have thought Dad did repairing or something, but no way. Hubert Marshall was the only one who repaired our shoes. Oh, you had to do hair cutting, of course. I've told you about that. Dad used to cut our hair from time to time. Awful business. He had these hand clippers, teeth broken. And of course, everything Dad had was broken. He probably found them at the dump also. Dad didn't actually buy anything, He found something that might come in handy. I don't know where he would get all this stuff from, but, he didn't buy tools. He found tools. And he must have found those bloody clippers also. And we'd sit on a fruit case and we'd have a towel around us, and he'd cut away, We'd say you're pinching. And he'd insist he wasn't pinching. I'd know when I'm pinching, he'd say. And, we said, well, you're still pinching and so on. But we then, you look at me now. You look at my hair now. I looked like this when I was at school, because this is what Dad used to do. Thank God I had a bit of hair up here then. But he'd shave you up here. Oh, God, it was an awful business. When Mr. Michael came to town, the barber, and we somehow or another could, by subterfuge, we could get out to the barber. Well, we didn't quite know what to do when you went to a barber, because we didn't know what the etiquette was. But the etiquette really was, you'd go to the barber and you'd sit and you'd look and see who was in front of you, and then you wouldn't try to push in, but you'd take your turn. And Mr. Michael used to put smelly stuff on you, and it was very lovely. And you'd go out and you'd waft through the streets with the pong of Californian poppy, that was the hair oil you had, you see, in those days. So that was, in a sense, a sort of home maintenance, I suppose. And they were the things that we did. So there we are. That's a start. But I'm going to range outside the fence in a subsequent talk.